What is up, you guys? My name is Aubrey and this is my channel, and today I'm going to be talking about the Biden infrastructure bill, the $2 trillion infrastructure bill that President Joe Biden had announced a few weeks ago. And in this video, I want to focus on how this bill is being paid for, or at least some of the proposals that lawmakers and the president himself have announced and outlined as potential ways to pay for this bill. So let's get started. Now, at this point, you guys all probably know that there was a $2 trillion infrastructure bill that was announced a few weeks back by President Joe Biden. This is part one of a two-part bill, one part being infrastructure, like traditional infrastructure, including roads, railways, waterways, and bridges, and things like that. And the other portion of the bill, which is expected to be about the same size, so $2 trillion, is for social infrastructure. So resources for families, students, children, things like that. Now, whenever the government and lawmakers start talking about large bills, not just infrastructure bills, but just bills in general, there is always the question of, well, how is it going to be paid for? And this is a question that is being asked quite a lot in relation to this $2 trillion infrastructure bill. And I think that this topic is very interesting, and because of that, I want to cover it in today's video. Now, before I begin, I would like to preface that me talking about how this bill is being paid for isn't necessarily a political argument. I'm not here sitting in front of you telling you if this bill is bad or if it's good or what my personal opinions are on this bill. I feel as though lately, anytime I talk about this bill, I get bombed with dislikes, and I'm not giving you guys my opinion here. I'm not even preaching the bill or preaching against the bill. I'm simply just stating the facts of how this bill could potentially be paid for. These are things that both Republican lawmakers as well as Democratic lawmakers have put forward as potential paths for funding. So again, keep that in mind before you hit the dislike button just because you don't like this bill or you don't support the bill. Whether you support or whether you do not support this bill is quite honestly irrelevant to this video, because it's an important topic to talk about how these things get funded, because of the fact that it's a key part of legislation and creating bills, whether it's an infrastructure bill, a spending bill, a human rights bill, whatever the case is, how a bill is being funded is a key portion of every aspect of law. And I think it's an important thing to cover. But before we dive into how exactly this bill is being funded, let's first talk about what this bill covers and what this bill is funding and what efforts it's funding. $621 billion of this bill is being allocated towards things like roads, railways, airports, bridges, waterways, as well as electric vehicle development and public transportation. $400 billion is being allocated to care for elderly and disabled Americans. $300 billion is going to be allocated towards improving our drinkable water systems, so replacing lead piping, replacing outdated piping systems, really making our water distribution more efficient so that every rural city and county in the United States can have access to clean drinking water. More than $300 billion is being allocated to creating and retrofitting affordable housing, along with the effort of creating and upgrading schools. And $580 billion will be allocated to American manufacturing. Now, when it comes to the overall likelihood of this bill being passed, I think that it is very unlikely that this bill gets passed in its current form. There is virtually no Republican support of this bill, but at the same time, there has been real efforts made by the administration to show that they are willing to negotiate. In fact, earlier this week, President Joe Biden met with a bipartisan group of lawmakers to discuss where they could be headed and what different things could be negotiated on this bill. So I do think that this bill does have a likelihood to pass, but I do think it will look dramatically different than it currently looks. In fact, there is rumors that Republican lawmakers will introduce a roughly $630 billion infrastructure package that they are going to introduce to try to combat and counter this $2 trillion package. Now begs the question of this video, which is how are we going to pay for this bill? $2 trillion is a lot of money and it has to come from somewhere, at least as long as the government doesn't want to crush the value of the US dollar. They can't just simply print out that money. And the question is, where do they get it? President Joe Biden has already said that he does not want this bill to increase the federal deficit, which leaves us with a handful of different options that we could pursue. Number one is income taxes. Now, this is something that shouldn't come to a surprise to anybody because it's something that President Joe Biden said on the campaign trail. He repeatedly said that income taxes would rise, but they would not rise for earners who are making $400,000 or less. Meaning, if you make $400,000 or less, you will not be impacted by this income tax increase. But if you make more than $400,000, you will be impacted. Now, the exact numbers of what an income tax increase could look like are at this point not entirely known because things change and things get negotiated and adjusted. But as of right now, the number that has been thrown around is increasing it from the current 37% to a 39.6% for earners who make above $400,000 per year. In addition to just individual income tax, there is also the idea and the possibility that it could come from taxing capital gains and increasing the capital gains tax. There is a proposal to increase the capital gains tax on capital gains of $1 million or more from the current 20% to an increase of 39.6%. Now again, that would only be on gains of $1 million or more, so it would not be on all capital gains. Now when it comes to a capital gains tax, there has been studies that have shown that a capital gains tax does negatively impact the market, and that negative impact typically happens 6 months after a capital gains tax is enacted or after a capital gains increase is enacted. But at the same time, there are also studies showing that a capital gains tax, like the one that's being proposed, could raise roughly $500 billion in taxes. Another really viable, and I would argue a very likely path that could be pursued is raising corporate taxes. Not only raising corporate taxes, but also changing tax structures and the way that deductions and tax incentives are taken into account to require and really make it so that corporations have to pay more in taxes. Now, this is something that, again, shouldn't come to a surprise to anybody because this is something that President Joe Biden has been talking about since before he even became president. And in my opinion, it wasn't a matter of if this type of thing happened, it was simply a matter of when it was going to happen during President Joe Biden's presidency. Now, it is at this point a fairly known fact that there are a lot of large corporations in the United States that have not paid any federal income taxes because of the tax loopholes that exist that favor large corporations. But what I found to be really interesting is not just how many of these corporations didn't pay federal income tax last year or the year before or the year before that, but how many of these corporations are companies that are not only household brands, but are brands that are raking in billions of dollars per year. A handful of these companies include Amazon, Delta, General Motors, Honeywell, Netflix, Whirlpool, and IBM. These are just a handful of the large corporations that, because of the way the tax system is structured, did not have to pay any money in federal income tax in 2018. And as far as 2019 and 2020 data, I was not able to find that, but the same would ring true for a handful of these corporations. In fact, I know that Amazon last year did not pay anything in federal income tax either. There is a proposal to raise the corporate tax from 21% to 28%. There's also proposals to really penalize corporations that outsource their work or outsource their staff. There's also going to be more incentives for American corporations to buy American, hire American, and grow in America as well. So these tax incentives, as well as the tax increase, will not only help potentially fund this $2 trillion infrastructure bill, but also help grow the US economy as well. But with that being said, you guys, I wanted to make this video because I think as much as I talk about bills and what these bills contain, I think an equally important part of the equation is how we pay for these bills. And the fact is, there is more often than not a real strategy behind how these bills become reality. And that is certainly the case here with this $2 trillion infrastructure. At the end of the day, we don't know what exactly this bill will contain. We don't know exactly how it will be funded, but these are a handful of the options that could be pursued in trying to get this bill passed. But like always, if you have any questions, comments, or if you have anything to add, make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.